Zuko wouldn't cry. He wouldn't. Azula was snickering next to him. Zuko tried to pay no mind to her. Ozai looked disapproving, disinterested even. Zuko briefly wondered which was worse. The young prince felt sore and tired, but he got up nonetheless. He had to get this kata right before Ozai would leave or punish him, or both. Father was a busy man. He didn't have time for failure. He didn't have time for Zuko. The prince was 8 years old, definitely old enough for this level of firebending. He could do this. He didn't have a choice. Zuko took a deep breath. Then he moved his hands and feet the way he had been shown, and finished the move with a decisive kicking jump. No fire came. Zuko had done everything exactly right this time, but still it hadn't produced even the smallest of flame. Ozai didn't say anything. Zuko didn't dare to look up and face him. He didn't have to look to know that his father was thinking. Disappointment. Insolent coward. No son of mine. Even so, Zuko wouldn't give up. He'd prove his worth. The prince got up, preparing to try again, but suddenly Ozai spoke. "Prince Zuko." Now he had to look up. For a moment, the child hoped that his father would tell him something that would help him complete his task, but the look on his father's face erased that hope. Father looked furious. "You have betrayed me." Zuko's fear was starting to show, and his voice came out as a plea. "No! Let me try one more time. I promise I'll get it right this time. I promise to be a better son." "You have betrayed me, your own father, your Fire Lord." Ozai's voice boomed in the empty stone hall. Suddenly, the hall wasn't empty anymore, as fire rose all around them, surrounding them. Zula giggled. "Oh, Zuzu, did you really think you could ever be good enough to be forgiven for what you are? You aren't even a firebender." Now it was Zuko's turn to be furious. "Of course I'm a firebender." Azula always lies. To prove Azula wrong, Zuko tried to call a flame to his hand, but none would come. Panicking, Zuko tried to draw a flame from the fires around him, but again to no avail. "Father never wanted you to succeed," Azula chimed in. "And why would he? Why would anyone want you?" Zuko, now 10 years old, looked around him, trying to find something that would make things better. That was when he saw Ursa standing in the doorway, outside the circle of flames. "Mother!" Zuko called for her, but although Ursa looked directly at him, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, looking at him with a sad look in her face. Ursa lifted her hand, and for a moment, Zuko thought she would come to his protection after all, but instead she pulled a curtain to block the doorway and herself from view. Zuko turned around very slowly to face his father. Now it was only him and Ozai in the circle of flames. "Please," a 16-year-old Zuko pleaded. "Don't do this." "There's no mercy for traitors." Ozai's voice was cold and heavy like water. The stone floor under Zuko's feet crumbled as he fell into icy salt water. The water was so dark, Zuko couldn't see where he was. All he could do was try to get to the surface. He needed air. When Zuko already thought he could swim no further, and the numb coldness devoured him completely, his hands touched something. There was a thick sheet of ice covering the surface. Zuko tried desperately to heat it, but again no heat would come. He was cold as within as the water around him was. That was when Zuko saw movement. There was a dark figure standing on the ice. Zuko looked the last of his strength onto banging the ice to get that someone to notice him. The figure looked at Zuko. It was the Blue Spirit, smiling at him menacingly. "No!" Zuko's long, scaly body could no longer keep fighting against the water pulling him down. Cold and alone, the dragon sank further into the abyss. "This is not how my story ends." "Uncle." Zuko looked around to see where the old firebender was. but saw no one. As his vision began to blur, he could make out something. A light was in the water with him. It was a boy with glowing blue tattoos. The dragon was shivering with a fever. This isn't over yet, Zuko reminded himself through the hazy half-sleep. There's still work to be done. This is no time to rest. Zuko forced his eyes open. It was still early morning. He couldn't have been asleep for more than an hour or so. Lifting his head, he had landed on a treeless mountain slope somewhere inland. From the vantage point, the dragon could see far into every direction. There was a village at the foot of the mountain, but as far as Zuko could tell, no other signs of human habitation. That was good. He didn't want company. The Avatar, Zuko remembered suddenly. I caught the Avatar. He lifted his neck a bit more to look around him, and sure enough, the Avatar was still in his grasp. The air nomad looked tired, but he was awake nonetheless, eyeing Zuko curiously. When their eyes met, Aang's face spread into a smile. Oh good, you're awake. I was starting to get worried. You don't look too good. Did you have a bad dream? I don't know, Zuko thought to himself. I'll tell you when I awaken from it. I used to have those too, nightmares. I was feeling really down because I was all alone, and it's my fault. I ran away and got lost in a storm, and because of that, there was 100 years of war. It was my job to prevent it, but I wasn't there. I betrayed everyone. My people are gone, and it's my fault. Zuko didn't know what to say. Not that he probably would have been able to say anything, as the connection his power dragons created still felt off. He had never thought the Avatar blamed himself for the death of his people. Surely the kid had to see that there was nothing a 12-year-old could have done to prevent it, Avatar or not. It wasn't Aang who was to be blamed for the death of the air nomads. For a lot of other stuff, sure, but not that. That one was on the Fire Nation's conscience. It was odd. Zuko had always thought he knew the Avatar, that he understood the boy. Now, he wasn't so sure. Having spent 3 years searching for him, and finding out all they could about his enemy, Zuko knew of the Avatar. He knew nothing of Aang. And he was only now beginning to see what a significant difference that was. The Avatar just wasn't a representative of the world or even of his element. He was a person, a human being with worries and hopes and regrets. He made mistakes. He had a past to haunt him. The Avatar continued, now noticeably happier. But I don't have those nightmares anymore. You know what really helped? Letting go of the guilt. Telling my friends about how I was feeling. It didn't ease my problems, but the burden is easier to carry when you don't carry it alone. For a while, neither youngster said anything. Iroh was rather pleased with how his task of capturing the Water Tribe siblings had played out so far. While Appa had been dozing off, Uncle and his men had carried the children out of the cave and to their ship. The lemur Momo had voluntarily accompanied them as well. Katara had stirred a bit while they were on the way, but the girl had been in no condition to stand up, let alone put up a fight. Iroh had attempted to tell her that her efforts were unnecessary because he would not harm them, but either the girl hadn't heard him or she didn't believe him. With help from Sergeant Cho and his medicine, the children were making a speedy recovery. They were not fully healed, though, so Iroh had ordered them to be locked into the medical bay. The room had first been emptied of most of its accessories, such as knives. Even the customary Fire Nation banners had been temporarily removed from the walls, as a courtesy to their guests. Despite his best efforts, Iroh feared his guests were far from enjoying their stay. Uncle sighed. The guard he had posted outside the medical bay door had just sent word that both kids were awake. The ship wouldn't make land for a few more hours, so there was still time for the children to recuperate, and for Iroh to get better acquainted with them. Iroh began walking toward the medical bay. He was undecided on what would be the best way to approach the upcoming conversation. Aang would have gladly told the Water Tribe children that they had nothing to fear from him. Unfortunately, he couldn't. As long as it was Zuko's wish to capture the Avatar, and so as long as Iroh would stand by his nephew, it would be a lie to call the relationship between him and the Avatar's companions anything short of hostile. The kids weren't really prisoners, but it would be deceptive of Iroh to imply that they were allies either. Iroh didn't have anything personally against the Water Tribe youngsters, no more than what he would have against anyone who wished his nephew harm. He hadn't yet had a chance to speak with them, so his idea of them was largely based on Zuko's descriptions. For someone with poor people skills, Zuko was remarkably inept at estimating people, especially his enemies. Zuko wasn't in the habit of giving unfair accounts either, so Iroh had a faith in his nephew's descriptions, brief as they had been. According to his nephew, Sokka was an inexperienced fighter, but what he lacked in experience he compensated for audacity. Zuko had saved Sokka from the Earth Kingdom militia, and his nephew's actions made him proud. But in Iroh's opinion, Sokka's actions had been much to the boy's credit as well. It wasn't easy to let go of years of hatred and rise above it, but Sokka had demonstrated exactly that type of behavior. Iroh could make use of that. Zuko had been rather reluctant to speak about the Katara, but the few things he had mentioned spoke of themselves. Apparently Katara had suffered a painful loss at a young age, a loss she irrationally blamed herself for. Katara was a brave and compassionate young woman, but she was never had a chance to mourn her loss or express her anger, which meant that when her sadness and anger did manifest, they were quite volatile. Iroh was no stranger to personal loss. After Luten's death, he had never been quite the same, so he really did understand where Katara was coming from. It was never easy to let go, but it was necessary. For the world to start healing, people in it needed to do the same. That was how the world would be saved. Not through more hate and destruction, but through healing. Iroh didn't know Aang very well, so he didn't make up his mind about the air nomad yet. Iroh believed that the world needed balance, and the Avatar could provide it, but he also knew that it was not a given that Aang would be a force for harmony. The boy might harbor no ill intentions, but he was, as Zuko had pointed out many times, young and reckless, sometimes to the point of callousness. Recklessness was a common flaw of the youth, but the Avatar's power and his willingness to take an active role in the world before he was fully realized were alarming features. Yet Iroh was not sold on his nephew's view that the best way to make sure the Avatar didn't hurt anyone was to lock him up. In Iroh's opinion, the young Avatar just needed the right type of people around him, the type that would support him, challenge him, and guide him along his journey. The true difficulty was finding the right people. Iroh had made his fair share of mistakes, but he also liked to think he had learned from them. He might be able to provide the Avatar with wisdom, but only if the boy would listen and take his advice to heart. However, running off to join the Avatar was not something Iroh was even considering. As long as Zuko considered the Avatar his enemy, Iroh would not betray his nephew by teaming up with the Airbender. Too many people had already abandoned Zuko because they thought he wasn't important enough. Iroh couldn't and wouldn't hurt his nephew in the same way, not even if the balance of the world was at stake. Iroh knocked on the medical bay door, despite knowing it was locked from the outside. Never hurts to be courteous. The Avatar was still talking, apparently unfazed by his companion's silence. Talking about friends, I'm not sure if you heard me earlier, but there's somewhere I have to be, so could you let me go? Or better yet, could you take me back to my friends? Without my glider, the trek back is going to take forever. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure which way I'm supposed to go. That makes two of us, Zuko thought wryly. Why did I bring us here? I was supposed to rendezvous with my ship in a harbor. Why didn't I stay close to water? Zuko could barely remember what he'd been thinking when flying here, so maybe he just instinctually decided to land somewhere secluded and safe, far from people. The dragon was still not feeling okay, but he pushed the nausea down. This was no time to be feeling under the weather, so he wouldn't. Zuko knew he would have to get up and start doing something soon, but he was reluctant. The rocky earth beneath him felt so warm and welcoming. He felt like a spring flower facing the sun, drawing in its warmth. Except he wasn't drawing his energy from the morning sun, but from the dark soul under him. Under the soul, earth and fire are one in an ever-ending dance. Master Kurta's voice reminded him. This area is volcanic, Zuko realized. This can't be a coincidence. My instincts must have brought me here to recuperate in a habit almost natural to dragons. And Zuko was feeling better, but also agitated. By what, Zuko could only begin to guess. But now he was sure something had woken him up. Something was going on. This place was no longer... Something was going on. This place was no longer safe. Dragon? About letting me go? But that was all the Avatar had time to say before Zuko made his decision. The dragon opened its wings and flapped a few times, testing how much they would hold, before Zuko was convinced he was well enough for a short flight. He stumbled up and away, rising into the air. We're moving again? Aang pointed out the obvious. Are you taking me back now? Wow, gotta give this kid some points for being a good sport. Most people wouldn't be understanding if they'd been kidnapped by a dragon. For all he knows, I could be on my way to my nest where my hungry cubs await. Then again, I did sort of save him. Maybe that led him to the conclusion that I'm friendly. Zuko had saved Sokka too. Maybe the Water Tribe boy had told the Avatar about that? That would explain the Avatar's attitude even more. Zuko was still feeling a bit dizzy, so he took only as much altitude as was necessary to get a good look at the top of the mountain, to get a good look at the caldera, if Zuko's hunch was correct. Did someone just knock on our cell door? Sokka was pretty sure his hearing was failing him, but seeing the wary look on Katara's face, Sokka realized he hadn't imagined it. Before they had time to ready themselves, the cell door opened, and in walked a familiar old Fire Nation soldier. Katara had been right. They were being held captive by Zuko. Good morning. I do hope you're feeling better, the soldier said calmly. We have met before, but I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Iroh. Iroh paused and smiled at Sokka and Katara expectantly. When neither of them said anything, he went on. And your names, I believe, are Sokka and Katara. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Iroh placed his fist in an open palm and bowed his head in a formal Fire Nation greeting. It occurred to Sokka that the man was alone in the room with him. He quickly weighed their chances of overpowering him. Iroh looked pretty old, but he was a firebender. He was probably some kind of firebending master. Maybe even Zuko's firebending master, Sokka realized. The guy did seem to follow the angry jerk around, watching closely but not really intervening. The door had been locked behind Iroh. Trying to take the man down was definitely an option, but not one they should try as long as the door was locked. Sokka turned to look at Katara, trying to make eye contact with her in order to convey his thoughts. Unfortunately, she wasn't looking around. Her eyes were never leaving the old man. What have you done with Aang? Katara spoke up, her tone accusing. Iroh looked thoughtful, though not surprised. Slowly he said, I haven't done anything to the young Avatar, nor do I know where he is. You're lying, Katara hissed. We both know Zuko's been out to get Aang since the day we met. A lot longer than that, actually, Iroh corrected her. Just because my nephew is under orders to apprehend the Avatar does not mean that I know anything about your friend's whereabouts as of now. My nephew? They're related? Now that Sokka was thinking about it, he realized that Zuko and Iroh did have some family resemblance. If this guy is Prince Zuko's uncle, what does that make him in relation to the Fire Lord? Probably nothing. Has to be from his mother's side. The guy just didn't give Sokka the brother of the most powerful firebender of the world vibe. What about Appa and Momo? Katara went on. And don't tell me you have no idea where they are at, because they were right next to us when you snatched us. I assure you that your animals have not been harmed. Sokka didn't know what kind of game the old man was playing, but he wasn't going to play along. Look, you can quit the whole interrogation business right here and now, because we ain't telling you anything. Actually, I was still smiling politely. I came here to check on your health and to ask if you would like something to eat. Why? We're your prisoners, Katara objected. We in the Fire Nation are in the habit of feeding our prisoners, Iroh said sincerely. Well, don't bother. We're not going to eat anything you offer us. Katara crossed her arms defiantly. Sis, are you sure? I mean, it's probably not going to be poison or anything, because if they wanted us dead, they would have found easier ways to. Sokka understood Katara's idea of rejecting anything they were offered, but he didn't agree with it. Their odds of escaping would increase if they were in full health and properly fed. Also, Sokka was really hungry, and the idea of turning down a free meal sounded deranged, regardless of the food's origin. Iroh turned a beaming smile towards Sokka. The food is not only safe, but also delicious. Seaman Sorto exceeded himself. We so rarely have visitors on board. As much as Sokka hated to agree with the Fire Nation guy, he said to Katara, You hear that? Katara didn't say anything, but eventually she sighed in defeat. A meal it is, Sokka said to the soldier. Wonderful, Iroh said and knocked on the door twice. The door opened again and another Fire Nation soldier walked in. He was holding a tray in his hands. I apologize for the lack of beverages. A necessary precaution, I'm sure you understand. Iroh took the tray and placed it between him and Katara. The food smelled mouth-watering, but Katara looked at it like somebody's dirty old sandal. Thank you, Seaman Lee. Iroh dismissed the older soldier. Why doesn't he come himself? Katara asked out of the blue. Or are we too far below his royal notice? Funny how that doesn't stop him from threatening our village. Iroh lifted one eyebrow. You are referring to my nephew, Prince Zuko, I take it. I'm rather certain he would have come here to personally pay his respects, were he present. I understand why you don't think highly of my nephew, but I assure you that, in amidst aside, he is an honorable young man who wouldn't want to cause you unnecessary grief. Zuko wasn't aboard the ship. That was good news. If the prince wasn't here, he couldn't use his mind-bending thing on them. Probably wasn't good news for Aang, though. So he's somewhere out there trying to capture Aang, Sokka guessed. I'm not certain. Where am I? Of course! Katara realized. You're going to use us as bait to lure Aang into a trap. The old man blinked. Twice. When Iroh finally composed himself, he not so suddenly changed the topic. Here I go, rambling on about my life while the food is getting cold. I would hate to keep growing teens away from their daily nutrition. With those parting words, Iroh left the room. Wow, it's an active volcano, Aang shouted past the wind whooshing past them. It looks dangerous. Smoke had begun to rise from the smoldering caldera. The black dragon was still holding Aang tightly in his paw as they flew over it. A thought occurred to Aang. Is that why you brought me here? To see the volcano? The dragon was silent as usual. Still, it made sense. The dragon had saved Aang from the Fire Nation. It had saved Sokka from the militia, so it was clearly a friend. Why would it be holding on to him, if not to make sure Aang would be where he needed it the most? There's a village nearby. We should go warn the people that the volcano is active, Aang said, determined. As the Avatar, it's his job to prevent these type of catastrophes. The more he thought about it, the surer he was that Black Dragon had known about the volcano, and that was why he had been so adamant about dragging him all this way. The dragon did one more sweep over the crater, and then he turned to head in the direction of the village. They got to the village at a speed that would have made an air bison look slow. The dragon landed in the middle of the main street. As it was still pretty early, there were only a handful of people on the street. They looked astonished to have a dragon and the Avatar land in their midst. Just before landing, the dragon let go of Aang, Aang using his airbending to land softly next to the dragon. Listen to me! Aang shouted to the people around him. I am the Avatar and I have come to warn you. The volcano next to your village is active, and it might erupt any day now. You have to evacuate as soon as possible. The villagers whispered to one another, but they didn't look too concerned. Didn't you hear what I just said? You have to leave, and soon. Aang repeated himself. One of the villagers stepped forward and said, It's alright. Mount Maptu won't erupt. If it was going to erupt, Aunt Wu would have foretold it. We have nothing to fear from the volcano. Just like I have nothing to fear from your dragon. If I were to be eaten by a dragon today, Aunt Wu would have foretold such an unusual fate. All Aang could do was gape at the man. He could swear the dragon rolled his eyes. It's a nice dragon. It won't eat you. The volcano, on the other hand, isn't nice at all. Aang kept ranting, but the villagers had returned to their duties, none of them paying any mind to him or his warnings. Aang didn't know what to do. He turned to the dragon. They won't listen. How can I warn them if they won't listen? He was starting to feel desperate. He was where he was needed, yet there was nothing he could do. Zuko considered taking a bite out of the villager to prove a point. What's wrong with these people? Don't they know that the only constant in life is change? For example, yesterday Zuko would not have been able to picture himself here today. Zuko had captured the Avatar. He knew that. It was the safest thing for everyone, and he would do it as soon as the village was safe. As irritating as the villagers were, they didn't deserve to die horrible, needless deaths. Zuko couldn't save the village alone. He was too weak, too tired, and the power of dragons mysteriously off. He had no means of communicating with them. The air nomad seemed to be the only reasonable person in the vicinity. Zuko needed the Avatar's help. The boy turned to Zuko. Perhaps I should go have a word with this Aunt Wu? Maybe she could help me convince these people that the threat is real. Zuko nodded, which caused the Avatar to stare at him in bewilderment. In that moment, Zuko realized that the boy hadn't so much counted on him to understand speech, as he had been talking to himself out loud. Zuko wondered if that took any weight away from the meaningful conversation they had had earlier. Probably not. It wasn't Aang's fault the talk had been one-sided. It was Zuko who was too weak to participate. To the Avatar's credit, he recovered quickly, and said, Okay, we'll do that then. Aang stopped a villager to ask for directions. Zuko realized the part of the aversion he was feeling toward the villagers was actually envy. He despised these people for the lack of control and responsibility they took for their own lives. But a part of him envied that certainty with which they believed in these prophecies. There was a great deal of comfort in blind faith. Zuko wondered where he had stopped believing in his own mission. Why was his heart no longer in it? Why was Zuko not sure whether he should capture the Avatar or not? Katara focused as hard as she could. There were tons of water just outside the ship. She knew it. She even thought she could feel it, just like she had been able to bend water that she couldn't see when they were helping Jet. No matter how hard Katara tried, she couldn't bend the water from this distance, nor could she feel any water sources closer to her. The Fire Nation soldiers had been clever enough not to leave liquids in the vicinity. It was incredibly frustrating. Katara was tired of being such a weak bender. Sis, you okay? Sokka asked suddenly. You look beat. I'm fine, Katara lied. I'm trying to see if I could bend the water outside the ship. Sokka nodded. Any luck with that? No. Katara sighed and added bitterly. I'm not strong enough for that. Sokka came over to her and wrapped his hand around her shoulder, saying, Don't be too hard on yourself. I'm pretty sure not even waterbending masters can bend water from that distance. What makes you say that? Katara wondered. Remember what Gran used to tell us about the waterbenders that got taken away by the Fire Nation? Of course, Katara remembered. We saw how the Fire Nation imprisons earthbenders, and that got me thinking that they probably do something similar with waterbenders. I don't know how dry a cell needs to be to be waterbender proof, but something tells me the Fire Nation does. I guess Io had taken your bending into account when preparing a cell for us. Katara nodded and suddenly found herself sobbing against her brother. Sokka looked alarmed and hugged her tighter. I'm sorry. I'm such an idiot. I shouldn't have brought that up. You know me and my big mouth, but it's okay. I won't let them take you away, I promise. Katara couldn't find her voice, so she just nodded. Her whole life had been shadowed by the fear that the Fire Nation would find her and take her away. Take away the last waterbender of the Southern Tribe, just like they had taken everything before her. If Katara let them take her away, then Mother would have died for nothing. Shh, don't cry, Sokka whispered. We'll think of something. We'll get out. That sound. Was it the lock? Was someone coming in? Both the youngsters turned to look at the door, expecting something to happen, but nothing did. The siblings exchanged a look. Sokka got up and went over to the door. Katara, too, got up. She wiped the tears on her sleeve. She had to be ready for whatever would come next. Sokka made eye contact with his sister and mouthed a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Sokka pulled at the door and it opened. They were both ready to fight the guard outside their cell, but it was unnecessary. There was no guard. There was only one living thing in the corridor. Just outside their cell stood Momo, looking surprised and holding a piece of fruit in one of his paws. Momo! Katara cried out. You must have opened the door for us. You are the smartest pet ever! She embraced their furry friend. Yeah, well done, Momo, Sokka said. I guess he's a lot smarter than I give him credit for. Sokka petted the lemur's head. I would have expected there'd be a guard outside our door, though, Sokka pondered. They're probably taking a break or something, Katara suggested. Maybe. Even the more reason for us to hurry. Katara nodded, still holding Momo in her arms. Follow me, Sokka whispered. There were several doors on the corridor. Sokka tried some of them, but most were locked. Only one door, the door at the end of the corridor, was unlocked. They snuck over to the door and Sokka slowly opened it. Behind it was a large storage room. The space had 2 levels to it, the bottom floor and upper floor, which was really just a couple of ramps along the sides. The door had opened to lead to one of the ramps, which in turn led to another door across the room. The only problem was there was a group of Fire Nation soldiers huddled around a small fire in the floor below them. Sokka quickly closed the door and turned to face his sister. We can't go that way, Katara whispered. Sokka shook his head. I don't think we have much choice. Look, the room is really dark. We'll be quick and quiet. They won't even know we're here. Sokka reopened the door and slowly stepped onto the metal ramp. The ramp gave a quiet squeak. Every hair on Katara's neck stood up. Both children held their breath, waiting to see if any of the soldiers below had heard it. Luckily, the soldiers were engaged in a rather loud conversation. Obviously hadn't heard a thing. Sokka went down on his knees and waited for Katara to do the same. Katara realized that Sokka was planning. If they distributed their weight more evenly, kind of like when they walked on thin ice, the metal would be under less distress and would squeak less. There was another advantage to going on 4s. The light from the fire below wouldn't reach them, casting suspicious-looking shadows. Sokka and Katara began slowly to advance toward the door on the other side of the room. Katara had only been half listening to the conversation below them when a familiar voice caught her attention. She turned to listen more closely. Prince Zuko is going to get himself killed before he hits 17, if you ask me, a soldier commented. Aye, who knows where he is even now? He was supposed to meet us here, and now we've been docked for an hour and there's still no sign of him. I do hope nothing bad happened to him. He's a good kid, deep down. Saved us from that water spirit and all, someone pointed out. What I don't understand is what on earth could make capturing the Avatar so important that the prince is constantly willing to risk life and limb like this. My nephew can be a difficult man to understand, but I believe there is a story I should share with you. It would shed some light on that matter. A familiar voice called from the shadows, causing both the soldiers and the children to startle. General Iroh! One of the soldiers got up and greeted. No need to get up, the old man said. I couldn't help but overhear what you were talking about. I'd like you to know that although my nephew can be secretive, he doesn't mean it as an insult. He is just a very private person. Sokka signaled for Katara to hold still for a while. The room had gotten a lot quieter now that everyone was waiting for Iroh to continue. If you like it, I could tell you a story that in part explains why my nephew takes his mission to capture the Avatar so seriously. The other soldiers nodded, and Iroh went on. This is the story of how, and most importantly why, Zuko was banished at the age of 13. Katara's eyes widened. Today she would finally learn what happened to the Fire Nation boy she'd seen in her dreams.